Well, I can honestly say, for a Backrooms film, this was everything I needed and at the same time wasn't enough. In my opinion, Kane Pixels knocked it out of the park for his debut theatrical project, and it's nice to say that yet again, YouTubers are out here proving their creative prowess. With both Iron Lung and Obsession, it seems the Backrooms is continuing the streak. This movie was suspenseful, but not necessarily a gore fest. Very much a deep dive into the characters whose narratives actually fit perfectly with something like the Backrooms. I highly recommend you watch it, but I'm gonna have to go into spoilers to break down why it's truly important that you check this movie out for yourself. And honestly, the movie really only solidified the theory that all of this could be taking place within someone's collapsing mind, but I'll get more into that by the end of the video. We follow two central characters as the rest aren't too fleshed out, unfortunately. We begin with Clark, a dysfunctional guy with a lot of insecurities, but not a horrible person at heart, but still dysfunctional to the point where it can leave others severely hurt. Now there's all kinds of dysfunctional people in the world, and there's all kinds of dysfunctions. While some can power through or even learn to live alongside it or temper it, some let their dysfunctional habits consume them. Clark was one of those people who had an ego, a narcissistic nature that left him feeling like the world was always taking from him and never acknowledging how his actions or coping mechanisms would hurt the people around him. It's clued to us throughout the film that he often spends time at the store or drinking, sometimes even drinking at the store. And through his dialogue with his therapist Mary, who we'll break down more later in the video, we could see that he also has a bit of anger issues. When they roleplay and replay the arguments he would have with his wife, he seems to feel he's entitled to a break considering he's the one who's working and paying all the bills, not fully acknowledging how spending all his time away and coming home drunk has been affecting his wife personally. This eventually got so bad to the point where they decided to split up, with Clark getting kicked out of the house and staying at the store for a while. The store seeming to be suffering power surges of recent, and Clark having a guy check things out. This led to a really interesting detail with some of the power box switches being dissorted in a random spot on the power box. Eventually one night the lights started flickering and Clark decided to go down to the basement and investigate once more. Now this time the misplaced switches on the power box seemed to control everything and then lose control completely, leading to Clark finding a small gap revealing the back rooms. Little did Clark know, he finally found the escape he was looking for all this time. I really enjoyed the non-found footage style while Clark was exploring the backrooms. Very resembling of a lot of A24 films, everything felt so off and I loved how no path was fluid. Clark comes across what looks like an async outpost following the Voyager sounds that I broke down within the trailer breakdown. Async being a company previously adverse in medical technology that switched gears to trying to uncover what the backrooms truly are. Kane Pixels' YouTube videos delve much deeper into Async's history as well as other folk who have been lost to the backrooms, and Clark seems to stumble upon what I think is Async attempting to reach out to either other living things within the backrooms, considering the backrooms function as a random dimensional doorway that can potentially appear and swallow people up from across the world, and these recordings could be some form of a way of maintaining contact, or they're meant for the entities that lurk within the backrooms. Either way, Clark is spotted wandering around, yet Async doesn't seem to put a stop to his research. At one point, Clark crawls through a tunnel and finds an Async bag, and once on the other side, he finally hears what seems to be an entity down the tunnel that he just crawled from, forcing him to flee through a very tiny doorway and luckily finding his way back out. And I definitely mean it when I say lucky, because this guy Clark is super fortunate not to only find a stable doorway to the backrooms, but also encounter an entity and escape with his life altogether. He tries to convince his therapist of its existence, him seeming more and more unhinged from Mary's perspective, especially with his crude map that he had drawn out for her. Mary probably getting some of her own nightmares resurfacing dealing with Clark, but again, we'll touch on that soon. Clark enlists the help of his co-worker Kat and her boyfriend Aerion Targaryen in order to scout more of the backrooms out. Seems between the last time we saw Clark, he came back and visited a few more times. I was really rooting for these characters to have any sort of depth, but alas, they really just ended up as cannon fodder for intensity's sake. Either way, Aerion Targaryen is voluntold by Clark to tie himself up and explore down a pathway. His girlfriend Kat obviously opposed, despite the dragon being down for it, as dragons don't die. But this entire sequence pretty much solidified Clark's self-absorbed nature. This man knows there's something else running around down there, and yet is ready to send Aerion down without any warning. Arian stumbles across some old gathered up clothing that seem to be molding, and my personal theory is that this is the entity's lair where he's been collecting and hoarding things it's found over time. And we'll touch more on the entities towards the end of the video. Either way, Arian, while searching around, spots the creature and immediately books it back up, not even waiting for the rope to pull him taut as he climbs whatever's left. This leaves the loop down below as he finally makes it up and they try untying him, but really take their time. He begins to get pulled down and they fail to release him in time as he's dragged down the shaft. With Clark and Kat leaning over, concerned for him, allowing the bed the rope was tied to knock them both down as well. We catch a glimpse of Aerion Targaryen getting ripped away behind a steel door with a blood streak left behind, and Kat chases after him desperately. Clark tries to escape and find his way out in some classic Kane Pixels found footage sequences. He stumbles into one room with a Christmas tree and some frozen mannequins illuminating red. As he walks around the tree, he gets jump scared by what can only really be described as mimics of human beings, stumbling and screeching after him. Clark eventually finds safety in some sort of bathroom floor and hears Kat on the other side of the wall, who claims that the wall is like a two-way mirror where she can say him, but he can only see a wall. She tries to warn him that something's behind him as a shadowy figure picks up the camera and we cut away. It's here we finally catch up with Mary, and her storyline really carried this film for me. Mary is a mental health professional who has been grappling with the loss of her childhood home slowly being demolished, all for a new luxury tower complex. Her lack of control over her childhood home being destroyed doesn't really sit well with her, having grown up in a dysfunctional home with so few happy memories with her mom that she could still hold on to, like when they put their hands in the pavement. Her mom's mental health forcing her to isolate and shield Mary away from the world. I feel like a lot of people who have grown up with or been around dysfunctional homes can really resonate with Mary's storyline here. As a young Mary who tries to look out the window and see what the outside world is really like, she keeps glancing back to make sure her mom doesn't aggressively respond with her paranoia yet again. And just like that, we have the only real jump scare to actually get me in this movie, with Mary's mom popping up behind her and warning her not to go outside. Still, there were a lot of other great jump scares within this movie, especially with Mary's dream sequences. She keeps having flashbacks to her mom that get interrupted by some bulldozing breaking down her house out of nowhere. Either way, I personally believe it was Mary's yearning to understand what her mother had gone through that led her down the path of becoming a mental health professional. And with her home being destroyed and the feeling of Clark slipping further and further away, Mary herself was at a perfect crossroads to enter the Backrooms and take a peek inside of what a truly dysfunctional environment can do to someone, and how it could even resonate with someone who grew up with a dysfunctional home. See, while Clark journeyed through the Backrooms with mystical joy and wonder across his face, Mary looked genuinely terrified the entire time and wanted to get out ASAP, just needing to find Clark first. But things get a little creepy when she finds presumably Clark's drawing of the tall shadowy figure. There were some scribbles of some nonsense on the wall and one paragraph that I really tried to lean in and see, but I got 4 eyes, I couldn't have spotted. But if someone did happen to catch what it said, let me know down below. Either way, Mary spots Clark spying on her and he reveals himself. It's obvious he lost it a bit and Mary's trying to understand what's going on with him as they hear something in the distance. Clark tries to calm her down in the worst way possible before straight up knocking her out. In a very interesting shot that zooms in on her face as she looks up towards the lights and fades off into unconsciousness. For fans who have ever associated Kane Pixels Backrooms as some dive into someone's failing cognitive health and their memories becoming more and more misplaced, I feel this film adds a whole lot to that. I mean, even every real world shot just seems a little too kept. A little all too together, and even the hills are green, the sky is blue, and the clouds are always perfectly shaped. The entire film could easily be seen as a journey into one's mind. Especially with sequences like when we see Mary's childhood home and go down beneath each floor with a more and more misplaced and inaccurate version or recollection of what Mary's home used to be, slowly transforming or devolving into the Backrooms, with Mary waking up on the dining table with an oddly calm Clark on the other side. Clark proving that he has truly found solace in isolation and never wants to return, bragging about how wonderful this place is. All this as he takes the humanish entities we saw earlier and begins begins stabbing them, claiming that he can eat them, and all to prove that they don't feel pain. Clark, finding envy in their robotic nature, their lack of emotion, and their emptiness altogether. Not to go too deep here, but this does seem like a serious reflection of depression. Clark is a failing architect who's also failing at his marriage and forced to keep up a store which is also failing. Clark is in a dark place, and it makes sense that he would seek an escape like this, even if it's in a place as dangerous as the Backrooms. And while what he thought he sought was isolation, what he really was seeking was to feel nothingness, finding a new life in a scary world better than the real one. But Clark isn't really a confident guy. He thought he found clarity, but still needed validation, seeking proof that this is the right choice and the world was to blame for everything that happened to him, that he hasn't lost his mind and that he's not at fault for being the way that he is. He forces Mary to wear the hair of a mimic woman, and he wants to roleplay again like we've seen in their earlier sessions, this time turning the fake argument with his wife to his favor, losing the calm facade he had earlier and yelling for Mary to admit that it's not his fault. Mary finally gets fed up and breaks the act, claiming that it just was all his fault, that the reason his wife kicked him out was because he was always whining and blaming the world for his problems instead of just trying to do better and taking some accountability. Mary admits that she doesn't know how to help him and that she tried, but she just can't, apologizing. In a way, this could be seen as cathartic closure for her struggles with her mom's mental health, maybe finding acceptance in simply letting go. Clark wonders if there's any hope for him, or if he even has to change in the first place, because he likes the new him and he likes where he's staying now. Mary says that he can do what he wants, he can stay the same and stay here as long as he would like. She really just wants to be let go at this point. And Clark seems to finally agree, going to untie Mary, and that's when Captain Clark, the big scary entity we saw the drawing of, arrives, sending the woman mimic into a panic frenzy. Clark tries to calm it down, claiming they don't have to change, before Captain Clark picks him up and takes him in for a hug, and instead takes a giant chomp out of Clark, presumably killing him, if not the slam to the wall. Mary is able to get free and flees the monster, stumbling around the back rooms in some pretty creative locations. Mary escapes and eventually comes across what looks like the inside of a light well from the inside of a building complex, and even a mimic of a neighborhood before finally reaching what looks like the furniture store. Only it's not the furniture store, it's the Backrooms version. She tries to get out and breaks the captain's peg leg before accidentally triggering an async trap, causing a bunch of canisters of chemicals to go off and affect Mary. It turns into a crawling battle before she uses the piece of pavement that she had from her demolished house and uses her old sentimental memories to take out these deformed shadow memories of Captain Clark, bashing him in the head over and over until she can finally escape. That is, before she runs into some async hazmats who spray her and confuse her for some sort of scary entity and knocking her out. She wakes up and is transferred to meet with Mark Duplass' character Phil, passing by a dead Captain Clark which is being studied. Phil asks her some questions, trying to understand the Backrooms, but Mary just wants to know if she's going to be let go. Phil claims that's not his decision, but explains that the Backrooms have gates opening up from all over, and they're trying to figure out what to do. Mary, yet again feeling like a prisoner, despite fighting so hard for herself, is still trapped within the Backrooms and some sort of facility taking place within it. Despite the clouds and perfect blue sky within the windows that we can see, clouds that look an awfully lot like the real world clouds we saw earlier in the film. Her still being trapped sort of resembles how she was still trapped after her mom was officially gone. It was alluded to that she potentially still struggled to go outside even after her mom was gone. Either way, this film accomplished everything it really needed to for me, despite the sort of jarring ending due to the fact that we got no real closure. I did find the symbolism behind the narrative pretty cool though, utilizing characters with very fitting backgrounds and allowing for an effective and cohesive story with an emotional pull. This was not an action film, but it was very suspenseful, and while I didn't necessarily enjoy the lack of depth some characters got, like Kat or Aerion Targaryen, or even Phil in all honesty, I did enjoy how well Mary and Clark's stories intertwined within a world like the Backrooms. With her being a therapist, just trying to understand a dysfunctional mind, only to step into a world that resonates very well with a dysfunctional person, allowing her to finally find her own closure and accepting that she'll never fully understand how to accept or be comfortable with some people or some dysfunctions. Some may find the idea of her giving up on Clark sort of a downer ending. But I think we're all human, and sometimes the best thing we can do is just be honest for each other when we know our own limit, which is honestly more than a psycho like Clark even deserved, because he honestly caused most of the problems in this film. Still, while there being a brilliant performance by Mordo, but Mary's actor, Renee Rems, really stole the show, with her therapy and cold-like nature slowly transforming into a full unhinged look after stepping into a dysfunctional world she was so desperate to understand since childhood. I'm not sure any of that made sense, but you get my point. Now, following the idea that it's not actually just taking place within someone's mind, you could also see how your memories and mental state truly affect the things within the backrooms. Someone on Reddit broke it down perfectly by claiming that it seems like the backrooms feed off of memories of people close to an entrance, or maybe people materialize an entrance to the backrooms and populate it with their memories. That's why Clark has a lot of furniture in there, but the backrooms also create copies of people that Clark remembers. And these entities, such as the chair lamp guy, the bearded guy, and the red-haired entity, were memories of people that Clark knew. The red-hair entity is most likely a memory of Clark's ex-partner, as depicted in the old photo we saw of them together. These entities behave much like a human could be. They have faces, though largely different from the people they're based on. If you remember someone but don't think much about it, perhaps they linger in the back of your mind, creating an entity that is sort of like a half-baked memory. Notice how the chair lamp guy or the bearded guy looked oddly strange compared to the red-haired lady who just came off a little bit different, and also was much more reactive. In regards to Captain Clark, you could believe that the ones created of your own self are a little bit different. They're made from parts of our own perception of ourselves, but also of people's worst traits and tendencies, because no one really critiques themselves more than themselves. In this case, Captain Clark is the worst version of Clark, potentially resembling his failure as an architect and being a goofball selling furniture inside of a store, the parts of Clark that he resents the most. Which is why, when Captain Clark arrives in the kitchen at the end, the red-haired entity tries to run because Clark remembers that his wife is most likely afraid of him. It makes sense that the red-haired entity would freak out and be afraid of Captain Clark. The Captain Clark entity is also different in the sense that he is a manifestation of his own self. And like Mary said, Clark is too into himself and too into his inner thoughts, so it didn't create an idle or maybe tame entity like the bearded guy or the chair guy, but instead, per the x-rays at the end, filling the entity with real blood and bones. Now, it's pretty confirmed that the mental state in which a person has when entering the backrooms can affect how the entities react to your presence. Because we could see the photo by Mary was shown at the end of Captain Clark and Clark, it alludes to the fact that they could have been together for a while without being harmed, especially considering the way Clark was talking to it. Some people added to this by saying that the bearded guy that Clark cut into didn't feel pain and was edible because it was sort of like Clark subconsciously wishes he could just take advantage of people without dealing with the guilt of hurting them. And then it backfires on him because when Captain Clark sees this and him eating the other entities, it learns from that moment and decides to eat him. In other words, Clark really did take the steps to his own self-destruction. While there's a lot of character stuff, it's still a very suspenseful film, and while not perfect or necessarily for everybody, it is perfect for something like the Backrooms universe. One of my only real gripes was some of the characters needing more depth and the lack of the string-bean entity we've seen so many times before in things like Kane Pixel's videos or even the games. Realize. Still, very eerie, very liminal, and amazing sound design, with some quality cinematography and a blend of found footage and Kane Pixel style and A24 style that never felt too jarring for me and only really added to the film. While entities could have been more variable and some characters could have been delved into, I do think this film is a solid one and can even confirm the normies I watched it with still had a good time and a lot to say about it. Them immediately piecing together a lot of the mental health comparisons between both Clark and Mary. So I'm personally glad I gave it a chance, and I hope you're willing to give it a chance too. If not, let me know why down below, and like, share, and subscribe. Even if you do actually do that altogether, you should do that either way. Either way, appreciate the feedback, any support, and rest in peace Aerion Targaryen, who fared better in the Game of Thrones universe.
Sorry.